All right, so it's early in the year, but this is a great beginning to our sub-I season. Just a reminder to everyone, we had two sub-Is this month. Phuong is the first of them, and she'll be presenting this morning. She is a fourth-year medical student at the University of Washington. She completed her undergraduate degrees at Colby and Columbia through a dual degree program in which she studied physics, biology, and biomedical engineering before moving on to the University of Washington, where she completed her MD as well as a PhD in a collaboration between Oxford and NIH and her mentors at UW. She will be presenting to us today the topic of learning and the use of reward representation in the humans across cortex and time. So I'll give you the screen.
Thank you, Dr. Morgenstern. Okay. So I'll skip this. You can see the slide, the title slide?
Yes, we
can.
Great. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about my cognitive computational neuroscience research. First, though, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone in the department. The past 2+ weeks on this rotation have been really exceptional. I've really enjoyed working and learning from the faculty and residents. And so I appreciate the opportunity now to discuss with you a part of my Oxford PhD thesis related to how reward information is represented in our brain, how it gets used, and how it strengthens over time during learning. So I'll start off with a very simple analogy of navigating airports in two different places. The goal is related in both places. You want to catch your flight in time. And so you get your ticket, check in luggage, go through security, reach your gate, and then board the plane. So a lot of the representations used in one airport should be reusable in the other. Now, from a lot of human and rodent literature, we know that the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex in the medial temporal lobe, or MTL, are critical for forming representations of structure that is shared across environments. And it is well known that different types of relations, spatial and non-spatial, are represented similarly in MTL structures. Now, these representations extend beyond the MTL as well. For example, representations in posterior parietal cortex and human prefrontal cortex have been shown to be structured by similarities in the environment. And below is an example of structured representations in humans who navigated related rooms in which their tasks within some rooms were similar. And so it is known that temporal and extratemporal regions are critical for integrating shared structure in different experiences. Now, for my thesis, I looked at reward-related representations in particular, which are found distributed throughout many human subcortical and neocortical regions that support different neural processes. And I highlight some here, but they have been reported in several other cortical regions. But the manner in which these representations get used and strengthened over time is not well understood. And so another way to frame my research is I'm asking the extent to which reward information that is distributed over many brain regions are also repeating over time and integrated in how we represent in the brain our continuous experiences, which often involves multiple brain regions. So for my study on representations during learning, we used a two-choice task with reversal learning between two spatial scenes. And I measured electrocorticography signals across temporal cortex and prefrontal cortex as human subjects completed this task. And the participants were patients with medically refractory epilepsy undergoing ECOG monitoring for seizure localization at the NIH. So we trained subjects through a series of blocks, and one block is shown here, each consisting of a learning phase and a decision phase. And for the study, I focused on the learning phase, in which subjects learned the most rewarding choice between two alternative items based on reward feedback. Instructions about the task are shown at the beginning of scene 1 and scene 2 in each block. Examples of
Good morning, how are you?
Trials in each scene are shown here. Subjects were tasked to learn the most rewarding choices of two different item sets, where each item set consists of two items that the subject must choose between. And the reward probabilities are coupled such that the probability of a reward over the two items sums to 1. And so one item set corresponded to a face versus a building, and the other item set corresponded to an animal versus cutlery. And so in each block, either beach or forest was selected as the spatial scene for the first 60 trials, which I refer to as scene 1. Then the second 60 trials were carried in the other spatial scene, which I refer to as scene 2. And subjects were instructed that there was a reward reversal between the two different spatial scenes in a block for one item set, but no reward reversal for the other. So for example, if the animal or cutlery items that are in the reversal condition, then one example is the cutlery is most frequently rewarded in the beach scene, and the animal will be most frequently rewarded in the forest scene. Whereas the face building item set will then be in the non-reversal condition, and the face will be most frequently rewarded in both the beach and forest scene. And so on the right here, the black line is an example of the trial by trial reward expectations that we inferred from the observed choice behavior in one block. It ranges from 0 to 1, where 1 means an expectation of reward 100% of the time. And you can see the reward expectation converges toward the true reward in gold by the end of each scene for each item set. The face and building is on the top and the cutlery and animal on the bottom. So overall, there are 4 scene conditions that correspond to 4 different subsets of 30 trials. And we found that this probabilistic reversal learning task modulates reward expectation over trials and over sets of trials. And to measure the reward expectation, we developed a Bayesian framework where we assumed that the belief of the reward rate given the history of choices and outcomes is the product of the prior belief of the reward rate and the evidence for the history of choices and outcomes given a reward rate. So it's essentially just applying Bayes' rule. And the belief of the reward rate updates based on uncertainty. And the more certain you are, which increases with learning, the less updating or changes occur. And so as at the bottom, you can see over trials that by trial 24 on the right side, there's more certainty, a more narrow belief distribution, and a greater separation of the choices that are believed to be the item with a low versus high reward rate. So then the next question is, how much and where in the brain is this represented in a similar way? And so the hypothesis is that reward expectation that guides choices under uncertainty would be represented in the brain during this learning task. And with learning, there is an increasing relative reward expectation or an increasing ability to distinguish what is most rewarding and what is less rewarding. And so I measured the representation of expectation by performing a trial-wise regression of the mean power on this reward expectation X and choice C for one electrode K at 400 millisecond trial time point I at a time. And so shown here is an example of time point 3. And we repeat this for each time point from 2 seconds before to 1 second after choice is made. And we found that the representation of expectation, indicated by the W, varied over time and was locked to choices. And so you can see in this example at the bottom, an increase in representation across electrodes within 1 second prior to when the choice is made, indicating that reward information is distributed and being represented before a choice is made. Now, representations can change dynamically over time in each scene for each item pair in each block. And so we performed the trial-wise regression of neural power on reward expectations separately for each scene and each item pair in each block to derive an electrode by time point representation of expectation. And then To investigate how this representation was used between scenes, I measured the cosine similarity in the representation vectors. It's very commonly done in neuroscience to compare representations. And these we're also referring to as electrode maps at each trial time point I between the two scenes, which you can see here for the reversal and no reversal. And so in blue is the example similarity during reversal when we do not expect knowledge to be straightforwardly shared between scenes. And in black is the similarity during no reversal when we do expect knowledge to be shared. And then to get the contribution of each electrode in the similarity of representations, I removed one electrode, K at a time, and recomputed the similarity and subtracted the similarity with electrode K removed from the original brain-wide similarity. And in this way, we measured the contribution of each region to the similarity and representations shown between scenes by computing the mean representation similarity of all electrodes in a region. And so we found significant similarity between representations in the medial temporal lobe within 1 second prior to when the choice is made, when there was no reward reversal, and that's shown in gray, compared to when there was a reversal in blue. And across brain regions, the pre-choice representation of expectation in both the medial temporal lobe, MTL, and orbital frontal cortex, OFC, showed this significant similarity between scenes when there was no reward reversal, meaning the representations of expectation in MTL and OFC were reused between the scene when knowledge could be straightforwardly transferred between the two scenes. And we then investigated how these representations change over time and the extent to which it relates to learning, as measured by decreases in the change in total reward expectation error. So what we found was that the reuse of representations or similarity in representations in ATL increases with learning over blocks. And so this might suggest that strengthening of representations in a separate region in ATL affect downstream processes that control behavioral responses. And importantly, we found that when knowledge can be straightforwardly shared between scenes, when there's no reversal, representations of reward expectation in MTL and OFC are reused between scenes. We then found from looking over sets of trials separated by hours to days that representations in a separate association area are increasingly reused, and this increase was associated with increased learning. And so in summary, we found that patterns of activity that represent reward information are integrated into multiple brain regions, get reused in similar situations, and strengthened with learning. And what this suggests is reward is integrated into how we represent the world, and these representations form across various parts of the human brain, and they are reusable. And so with that, I'd like to just acknowledge many individuals across Oxford, University of Washington, and the NIH who supported me throughout the PhD process and also my medical training. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ifan. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hey, that was a wonderful presentation. Just want to encourage you, especially since you're hanging out with us at West, please visit Ignacio Saez's lab. So the team at West is pursuing some similar projects, but mostly using stereo EEG instead of grids. And it would be wonderful to start these collaborations early on. The lab is on the floor, and just tag along with us maybe when you're with us in clinic on Thursday. Be a great thing to see how a slightly different approach to this is used here and work together.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Panoff.
I have one question. So, it's kind of interesting because we do a WADA test, thinking about the utility of this type of work for a neurosurgeon. We do a WADA test, for instance, before someone's considered for anterior temporal lobectomy or other, ablative procedures. But these patients also usually have stereo EEG, which we do these sort of highfalutin, analyses and trials. But interestingly enough, we don't use kind of the most detailed assessment of function on laterality in actual decision making, quantify, have a patient do a set of tasks with stereo EEG, look at, based on laterality, what hemisphere is contributing to each, to different tasks, and kind of quantify what's going to be the reduction in function if we take this region out. So I'm curious, did you look at laterality? Is that something that you considered this work, or?
Yeah, that is a great point. One of the challenges with working with this data is the coverage is based on clinical need, and so we had almost just over 20 patients, but had to reduce that based on behavioral performance. And so we were left with a subset of patients, and in order to look at any region, we could only pool the patients who had coverage over that region. And so the short answer is we couldn't look at lateralization because we didn't have a large enough data set to really separate out left versus right MTL or other regions. But I think that's a great question that hopefully could be addressed with more data. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, iPhone. Now we'll move on to